Okay, so have you ever thought about, like, with all the typing we do these days, talking on our phones and everything,
Mm.
do we even need to worry about spelling anymore?
Hmm, that's a good question, you know?
It seems like not that long ago.
Yeah.
I mean, weekly spelling tests were just like a given in school, right?
Right. Yeah.
But you hear more and more about schools kind of shifting away from that and just relying on spell check to do the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
And I bet you've thought about this yourself at some point, whether it's, writing an email for work or maybe helping your kids with their homework
Mm.
or even just scrolling through social media and seeing all those typos. It's a real question in this tech world we live in, right?
It really is a big debate these days.
Yeah, so let's dive into it.
Yeah, let's unpack it.
To really get to the bottom of this, we're going to be looking at a really interesting article from 2021.
Okay.
It's from the Educational Psychology Review Journal, and it's called, Does Spelling Still Matter? And if so, how should it be taught?
Catchy title.
Yeah, right? The authors are Pan Ricard and Bjork, and we'll link to it in the show notes if you want to check it out.
Yeah.
But think of this episode as like your cheat sheet to the research money. We're going to try to answer two big questions that you probably have.
Okay.
First, in this age of autocorrect, do we even need to care about good spelling anymore?
Right.
And second, if it's still important, what's the best way to actually learn it?
Uh-huh.
And we're going to be looking at both the history of spelling instruction
Okay.
and the latest research.
That's a good overview.
Yeah. So to kick things off, let's go back in time for a minute.
Okay, time travel.
Yeah. Our source talks about this fascinating piece of educational history. It's called the Horn-Ashbaugh Speller.
The Horn-Ashbaugh what?
Speller.
Okay.
It was published in 1920, and it wasn't just some random textbook. It was like the state-of-the-art spelling book of its time.
Wow, so it was a big deal back then.
Oh yeah, this thing was huge. It had almost 4,600 words in it,
Wow.
all broken down by grade level. And it wasn't just a list of words either.
Yeah.
It actually laid out a very specific daily routine for learning them.
Okay, so how did that work?
So they had weekly word lists, of course, but then also get this, lots of testing.
Like quizzes.
Yeah, so there were pre-tests to see what students already knew.
Okay.
And then they had diagnostic tests, like throughout the week,
Uh-huh.
to really figure out where kids were struggling. And then they also had time set aside for writing and word study.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was pretty comprehensive.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So even back then, they were really thinking about how to teach spelling effectively.
Right, exactly. So now let's fast forward to today.
Okay, back to the present.
Right, our article talks about how there's been a pretty big shift in how we think about spelling.
Yeah.
Like there's a growing skepticism about whether it's even that important anymore.
Yeah, you hear that a lot.
Right. And as we mentioned, those weekly lists and tests that were so central to the Horn-Ashbaugh Speller, they're kind of being downplayed now, or even eliminated in a lot of schools, and not just a few schools.
Right.
Either our source mentions something like 250 schools that have made this change.
Wow.
Yeah, and they actually have a table in the article, Table 1, that gives some specific examples of where and when this has happened.
Interesting.
And we're even seeing spelling assessments, like, completely disappear from some standardized tests.
So it's a pretty significant trend.
It really is. And the reasons that people give for this shift often come back to, you guessed it, technology.
Of course, right.
Right? The argument is that with spell check and autocorrect being everywhere, why bother spending so much time teaching spelling rules?
Right, like the computer will just fix it for you.
Exactly. And then there's this other idea that, the way we communicate informally online has kind of changed what correct spelling even means.
Mm-hmm.
The article actually quotes a few people that really sum up this viewpoint. Like, for instance, there's this professor of educational technology who in 2013 said that with autocorrect, emphasizing grammar and spelling is just unnecessary. And then there's this columnist for the Financial Times who in 2014 joked that typos only matter if you're trying to hire a proofreader.
Okay.
And then there was even this opinion piece in Wired magazine in 2012 that called English spelling a terrible mess and suggested that we should all just accept a more relaxed standard.
So basically they're saying that technology has solved the spelling problem, or that maybe it wasn't even that big of a problem to begin with.
Exactly. But here's where things get interesting. The article then goes on to present a really strong argument for why spelling still matters a lot despite all these technological advancements.
Okay, so they're pushing back on that idea.
Right. And it's not just about being a grammar stickler.
Mm-hmm.
It actually has some real-world implications, like in the workplace, for instance.
Okay, so how does spelling affect your job prospects?
Well, it turns out that recruiters in all sorts of fields, from finance to tech, They consistently say that good spelling and writing skills are really important to them when they're looking at job applicants.
That makes sense.
And there's this statistic from an Adecco survey that's pretty eye-opening. It found that 43% of recruiters would automatically reject a candidate if they had spelling errors on their resume.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, and it's not just a gut feeling either. Studies have actually shown that job seekers who have spelling mistakes in their applications are less likely to get interviews, and recruiters tend to have a less favorable impression of them overall.
Like they think less of them as candidates.
Exactly. They question their professionalism, their attention to detail, even their writing ability, just because of a few typos.
So it can really hurt your chances.
Yeah, and this idea that spelling matters, it goes beyond just individual job seekers. It can actually affect entire businesses.
Really?
Yeah, think about it. Imagine you're a customer and you see a typo in an ad for a company.
Okay.
Studies have shown that that can actually make you less interested in that business.
Interesting.
And online reviews that are full of spelling mistakes, they make the company look less credible and the review itself less trustworthy.
Yeah, I can see that.
And for e-commerce websites like ones that sell things online, the impact can be even bigger. Some estimates say that up to half of online sales could be lost simply because potential customers see misspellings on the website and they get wary.
So it's a matter of trust.
Exactly. And, those emails that you get that are obviously scams,
Right.
a lot of times they're full of spelling errors.
That's true.
So, yeah, it's not just about appearances. Bad spelling can actually cost companies money.
It's like a hidden cost.
Right. And it's not just about professional settings either. It actually affects how we perceive other people, even in more casual contexts.
Okay, so you're saying spelling affects our social interactions.
Yeah, the article points out that even elementary school students, as well as adults, they tend to judge writing and writers more negatively when there are spelling errors present.
Interesting.
And what's really interesting is that even when people know that the writer probably used spell check, they still hold them accountable for the errors.
So it's like we can't help but judge.
Right? Researchers call this the halo effect of correct spelling, meaning that when you spell well, people tend to assume that you're more competent and detail-oriented in other areas as well.
So it's like a shortcut to a good impression.
Exactly. And on the flip side, errors can really damage that impression.
Makes sense.
And this plays out online too, like in forums and discussion boards. Posts with misspellings are often met with more skepticism, and people question the author's credibility.
It's like they don't trust what they're saying as much.
Right. So even though we might think that spelling isn't that big of a deal anymore, it actually still has a lot of power.
Yeah, it seems like we can't escape it.
Now you might be thinking, okay, but what about school? Like, don't they teach spelling there?
Right.
And it's true that some big standardized tests, like the SAT here in the U.S., they don't directly test spelling anymore.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that spelling has completely disappeared from education. Like the U.S. Common Core State Standards, those actually include specific spelling benchmarks that students are supposed to meet starting in 3rd grade.
So schools are still responsible for teaching it.
Exactly. And in some states, there are even penalties for incorrect spelling on their standardized tests.
Interesting.
And in the UK, 11-year-old students have to take a test called the SPAG test, which stands for Spelling, Punctuation, and Grammar.
The SPAG test.
Yeah, so even though the focus might be shifting in some places, spelling still has a place in education.
Okay, so spelling still matters, but what about technology? Doesn't that change things?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
Like, does spell check basically make it so we don't need to be good spellers anymore?
Right.
Well, the article dives into this, and they talk about a really interesting study from 1988 by Connors and Lunsford, and then a follow-up study by Lunsford in 2008.
Okay.
So what they found was that, well, the overall number of errors in student writing didn't really change that much between 1988 and 2008. The types of errors did change.
Okay, so what shifted?
So back in 1988, the most common mistakes were straight-up misspellings, But by 2008, those had actually dropped significantly. They were only the 5th most common type of error.
So what took their place?
Well, the number 1 type of error was using the wrong word, even though it was spelled correctly.
Okay, so like using their when you should use their.
Exactly, or to, and to.
Right, those tricky homophones.
Yeah, and of course spell check often misses those because the words themselves are spelled right.
It doesn't understand the meaning.
Right, it just looks at the letters and says, okay, that's a real word,
Yeah.
but it doesn't know if you're using it in the right context.
Right.
And this is a big limitation of just relying on spell check. you know?
Yeah, I can only do so much.
And the article points out other limitations too, like some research suggests that even the best spell check software only catches about 80% of errors.
So you're still missing 20%.
Right. And then there are things that spell check often misses altogether, like proper nouns
Okay.
and capitalization and punctuation.
Mm-hmm.
And if a word is really badly misspelled, the program might not even recognize it to offer a suggestion.
Yeah, that happens to me sometimes.
Right. And then there's also this problem of what you might call a false sense of security, you know?
Like you get lazy about proofreading.
Exactly. Because, spell check is there.
Yeah.
You might not pay as much attention to your spelling as you're writing.
Right.
And while AI, artificial intelligence, is getting better all the time,
Mm-hmm.
the research suggests that we can't just completely hand over the responsibility for correct spelling to technology.
Yeah, human brains are still needed.
Right. Okay, so now let's talk about something else that's changed the way we write.
Okay, what's that?
Texting, and all those abbreviations and shortcuts that we use.
Oh, right, like lolo and burb.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Have you ever wondered if using those so-called textisms has actually made our spelling worse in more formal settings?
I've definitely wondered that.
Well, the research on this is actually pretty reassuring.
Oh, good.
Yeah, studies have found that using textisms doesn't really predict poor spelling ability in either adults or children. Like, it seems like most people are able to switch between their informal texting style and more formal writing without too much trouble.
Okay, so it's like they can keep those separate.
Right. That 2008 study by Lunsford that we mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
they didn't find much evidence of textisms showing up in formal student writing.
Uh-huh.
And while some teenagers might admit to using them in schoolwork every now and then,
Mm-hmm.
overall the use of standard spelling in more formal contexts hasn't really gone down that much.
So it's still the norm.
Right. It's still important for clarity and professionalism, whether it's in a formal document or even just an email.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so we've established that spelling still matters.
Right.
But now let's talk about how it connects to other important skills, like reading and writing.
Okay, so are good spellers also good readers and writers?
Well, the research on this is a little bit mixed.
Uh-huh.
It makes sense intuitively that misspellings can make text harder to read. And there's definitely a connection between being a good speller and being a good reader. But it's not always a clear cause and effect relationship.
Okay, so it's not like one automatically leads to the other.
Right. Some research has suggested that teaching kids spelling can actually improve their reading skills.
Interesting.
But there are also some researchers who say that we can't really say for sure that one causes the other.
Uh-huh.
And there's also the fact that it's more common for someone to be a good reader but a bad speller than the other way around.
So it's not a perfect one-to-one relationship.
Exactly. Now, what about writing?
Okay.
Have you ever thought about how spelling might affect your writing ability?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're constantly worrying about how to spell words, it seems like that would take up brain power that you could be using for other things.
Right, like organizing your thoughts or coming up with good ideas.
Exactly.
And there's this theory that having trouble with spelling can actually hinder your overall writing skills.
Uh-huh.
But the research on this is also a little bit complicated. One study found that teaching kids spelling didn't really lead to big improvements in their writing. And while there's a correlation between being a good speller and being a good writer, we can't say for sure that one causes the other.
Right. Correlation doesn't equal causation.
Exactly. So the relationship between spelling and writing is probably more nuanced than we think.
Okay, so spelling is important. We get it. But how should we be teaching it?
That's the big question. Right?
Yeah.
And the article talks about this debate between two main approaches, explicit instruction and incidental instruction.
Okay, so what's the difference?
So explicit instruction is basically when you directly teach spelling rules and patterns.
Okay.
Like you have specific lessons on how to spell certain words and you give kids word lists to learn and you do exercises and stuff.
Right.
Incidental instruction, on the other hand, is more about learning spelling indirectly through reading and writing activities.
So like picking it up naturally.
Exactly, like a teacher might correct a spelling mistake when they see it in a student's writing. But they're not necessarily teaching specific spelling rules or anything like that.
Okay.
And of course, some schools use a combination of both approaches.
So which one is better?
Well, historically, explicit instruction has been the more traditional method.
Okay.
Like for centuries, that was just how spelling was taught.
Right.
But the idea of incidental learning really started to gain traction in the 1970s.
Interesting.
There were a few reasons for this. One was that some researchers started to believe that kids naturally develop spelling skills just through exposure to language.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was also this concern that traditional spelling instruction was too isolated from other subjects, like reading and writing.
Right. So it wasn't connected to anything meaningful.
Exactly. And
Mm-hmm.
since the 1970s, we've actually seen a trend in some U.S. school districts to move away from that direct instruction approach and towards more incidental methods.
So what does the research say about which one is more effective?
Well, the evidence pretty strongly favors explicit instruction. Like, reviews of tons of studies have consistently shown that students who get explicit spelling instruction, they actually improve their spelling skills more than those who learn spelling incidentally.
That makes sense.
And some researchers have even argued that incidental learning should only be used as like a supplement to explicit teaching, not a replacement for it.
Okay, so it's not enough on its own.
And the article brings up this really interesting case study of what happened in California in the late 1980s.
Okay, tell me about that.
So in 1987, California decided to make this big shift towards literature-based instruction, which basically meant emphasizing incidental spelling learning.
Okay.
Spelling was taken off the list of required subjects.
Wow.
And the idea was that students would just pick it up naturally through reading and writing in other classes.
Mm-hmm.
But by the early 1990s, people started to get really worried because there was this noticeable drop in statewide reading scores.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and parents were complaining about their kids' bad spelling,
So it backfired.
pretty much.
Ah.
And eventually the state ended up reversing course and going back to more explicit spelling instruction.
Okay.
And guess what? After that change, student spelling scores actually started to improve.
Wow. So that's pretty strong evidence that explicit instruction is important.
Right, it shows that just hoping kids will absorb spelling naturally might not be the best approach.
Okay, so we've settled the explicit versus incidental debate.
Yeah.
But does that mean we should just go back to those old school methods like the Horn-Ashbaugh speller?
That's a good question, and the article actually digs into that.
Okay.
Like, our understanding of how people learn has come a long way since the 1920s, you know?
Right.
And even though Horn-Ashbaugh speller had some good things going for it,
Uh-huh.
there are also some aspects of it and other traditional approaches that might not be the best fit for how we teach spelling today.
Okay, so let's break that down. Can you remind me what that weekly schedule looked like in the Horn-Ashbaugh speller?
Sure, so on Mondays, students would get a new list of words and take a pretest to see which ones they already knew. Tuesdays and Thursdays were for studying the words they missed on the pretest.
Yeah.
And they had this specific method for studying progress. They would look at the word, say it out loud, try to picture it in their mind, cover it up, write it down from memory, and then check if they got it right.
Sounds pretty thorough.
Yeah, and they would repeat that whole process a bunch of times.
Wow.
Then on Wednesdays and Fridays, they had diagnostic tests.
More tests.
Yeah. But these tests weren't just on the current week's words. They also included review words from previous weeks.
Okay, so they were constantly reviewing.
Exactly. And students were also supposed to keep a spelling notebook where they tracked their progress and wrote down any words they found particularly tricky.
Interesting.
And at the beginning of each school year, they even had a review of words that had been difficult for them the previous year.
So it was a pretty systematic approach.
Very systematic. And what's really fascinating is that some of those techniques that they were using back then are actually backed by modern research on how people learn. Yeah, like all that regular review of previously learned words,
Uh-huh.
that's an example of what we now call distributed practice or spaced repetition,
Okay.
which basically means learning information in chunks spread out over time.
Right.
And that actually has a much bigger impact on long-term memory than just cramming everything at once.
That makes sense.
And all those tests and self-correction exercises that they did,
Yeah.
that's a form of retrieval practice, which means actively trying to recall information from memory.
Uh-huh.
And that's actually more effective than just passively rereading or restudying something.
Interesting. So they were kind of ahead of their time.
In some ways they were, even though they didn't have the research to explain why those methods worked so well.
So they got some things right, but I'm guessing there are also some criticisms of the Horn-Ashbaugh speller and other traditional approaches.
Definitely, like,
Yeah.
you have to remember that the Horn-Ashbaugh speller was very much a product of its time.
Right. Things have changed a lot since then.
Yes, exactly. It was based on these behaviorist learning theories that are now considered to be pretty incomplete.
Okay.
Like, for example, it put a lot of emphasis on visual learning as the main way to learn spelling.
Okay.
But we now know that spelling actually involves a lot more than just seeing the word.
Uh-huh.
Like, it also involves things like phonological awareness, which is understanding the sounds in words,
Okay.
and morphological awareness, which is understanding the meanings of word parts.
Right.
And the Horn-Ashbaugh speller also kind of dismissed the importance of teaching spelling rules and phonics.
Mm-hmm.
Because back then, people thought that English spelling was just this random mess.
Right.
But we now know that it's actually more systematic than they realized.
Oh, okay.
And the Horn-Ashbaugh speller didn't really take into account the fact that kids develop spelling skills at different rates.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't have a good way of figuring out what specific kinds of spelling errors individual students were making.
Right.
Which are actually really important things to consider when you're teaching spelling.
Right. So it sounds like our understanding of spelling and how to teach it has evolved quite a bit.
Definitely. Okay, so now let's talk about something that's still super common in schools today. Those weekly spelling lists and Friday tests.
Right.
Have you ever wondered if those are really the best way to learn spelling?
I've definitely had my doubts.
So even though the Horn-Ashbaugh speller was more comprehensive than what a lot of schools do now,
Mm-hmm.
the basic idea is still the same. You get a list of words on Monday, you study them during the week, and then you have a test on Friday.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
But the problem is that those crucial elements of distributed practice and retrieval practice that we talked about, they often get lost in this format.
Okay.
Like students are just given the list and told to study it, but there's not really any built-in review or practice testing.
Mm-hmm.
And this method has been criticized for a few reasons.
Like what?
Well, one is that it leads to a lot of forgetting.
Like they memorize the words for the test and then forget them.
Exactly. It's called the Friday test, Monday miss phenomena.
Oh, right.
And it also doesn't really help students develop a deep understanding of spelling patterns
Uh-huh.
or the ability to transfer that knowledge to new words.
Right. So it's not very useful in the long run.
And it can feel really boring and repetitive for students.
Yeah, like just rote memorization.
Exactly. And this dissatisfaction with traditional methods has led to a lot of research into new and better ways to teach spelling.
Okay, so what are some of those newer approaches?
Well, one thing that's changed is that we now have a much better understanding of English spelling itself.
Okay.
Like it used to be thought of as this completely irregular, crazy system.
Right.
But research has shown that it's actually more rule-based and predictable than we thought.
Really?
Yeah, like computer analyses have shown that a big chunk of English words can be spelled correctly just by understanding a few basic rules.
Wow. So it's not as random as it seems.
Exactly. And these rules involve things like phonics, which is the relationship between letters and sounds,
Okay.
and syllable patterns, which is how words are broken up into syllables,
Oh.
and morphemes, which are those meaningful units within words like prefixes and suffixes,
Right.
and even etymology, which is the history of words and how they've changed over time.
Interesting.
And this understanding has led to the idea that spelling instruction should focus on teaching these underlying rules and patterns,
Okay.
rather than just making kids memorize lists of words.
So it's more about understanding the system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And our definition of what it means to be a good speller has also expanded.
Okay. Yeah, in what way?
Well, it's not just about getting the letters in the right order anymore.
Right.
It also includes things like phonological awareness, which is being able to hear and manipulate the sounds in words,
Okay.
and morphological awareness, which is understanding how words are built from smaller, meaningful units,
Uh-huh.
and orthographic knowledge,
Hmm.
which is knowing the common spelling patterns in English,
Right.
and even being able to use resources like dictionaries and spell check effectively.
So it's a much broader set of skills than it used to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the article talks about 3 common approaches to explicit spelling instruction that incorporate these newer ideas.
Okay, tell me about this.
So the first one is called the phonemic approach.
Okay.
And this one focuses on the relationship between sounds and letters.
Uh-huh.
So it often involves teaching explicit phonics rules, like
Right.
the different ways that the letter A can sound, for example.
Okay.
And the second approach is called the morphemic approach.
Morphemic.
Yeah, and this one teaches students about morphemes, those meaningful parts of words like prefixes, suffixes, and root words,
Right.
and how those affect spelling.
Okay.
And then the third approach is called the whole word approach.
Whole word.
Yeah, and this one is important to distinguish from whole language, which is a different thing altogether.
Right.
But the whole word approach is about focusing on the spelling of entire words, particularly ones that are irregular or don't follow typical patterns.
Oh, okay.
And it often uses strategies like self-corrected testing, which we talked about earlier, where students test themselves and then check their answers.
Uh-huh.
And research has shown that all 3 of these approaches can be effective,
Okay.
But it's important to remember that there's still a lot of debate and ongoing research in this area.
Right.
So what works best might depend on a lot of factors, like the age of the students and the specific words they're learning.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, the article also points out that there are a lot of spelling activities out there that aren't actually supported by research.
Oh, like what kind of activities?
Well, some of them are those creative activities that
Ooh.
might seem fun and engaging,
Okay.
but they don't really target the skills that are needed for good spelling.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, there's this game where you write spelling words on a beach ball and then toss it around,
Okay.
and whoever catches it has to spell the word that their thumb lands on.
Hmm.
And that might be a fun way to get kids moving and engaged,
Right.
but it doesn't really teach them anything about phonics or morphemes or any of those other important concepts.
So it's more about entertainment than education.
Yeah, exactly. And then there are also activities that are based on the idea of learning styles.
Oh, right. Like the idea that some people are visual learners and some people are auditory learners.
Exactly. But the problem is that research has actually debunked that myth.
Yeah.
Like, there's no evidence that people learn best through one particular style.
Uh-huh.
And tailoring instruction to those supposed learning styles doesn't actually make a difference.
So that's a waste of time?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And the article emphasizes that there's still a big gap between what research says are the best ways to teach spelling and what actually happens in a lot of classrooms.
Yeah. Seems like there's a lot of room for improvement.
Definitely. And teachers really need to be careful about choosing methods that are actually backed by evidence.
Okay, so let's talk about spelling tests again. We mentioned that some schools are getting rid of them altogether.
Right.
What are the reasons for that, and is it a good idea?
Well, the main arguments against spelling tests are that they're not really useful for learning, that they just test short-term memory, that they encourage rote memorization instead of understanding,
Uh-huh.
that they're stressful for students, and that they're not a realistic way to assess spelling in the real world.
Right.
But the article makes a really important point, which is that we need to distinguish between different types of spelling tests.
Oh, okay, so there are different kinds of spelling tests.
Yeah, there are pre-tests, practice tests, and post-tests, and they all serve different purposes.
Okay, so tell me about pre-tests. What are those for?
So pre-tests are given before any instruction on the words,
Okay.
and their purpose is to see what students already know.
Uh-huh.
And that helps the teacher figure out which words they need to focus on.
Right, so they don't waste time teaching words that the students already know.
Exactly. It's about targeting instruction to where it's needed most.
That makes sense.
And there's even some research that suggests that taking a pretest, even if you don't know any of the answers, can actually help you learn the information better later on.
Really?
Yeah, it's called the pretesting effect.
I've never heard of that.
It's a pretty cool phenomenon, but it hasn't been specifically studied in the context of spelling yet.
Okay.
So we don't know for sure if it applies there, but it's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, okay, so what about practice tests?
Practice tests are all about retrieval practice, which, as we discussed, is one of the most effective ways to learn.
Right.
So instead of just studying the words passively, students are actively trying to recall them from memory,
Mm-hmm.
and there's tons of research showing that this is really beneficial for long-term retention.
So it helps them remember the words better.
Exactly. And there's also some spelling-specific research that supports techniques like self-corrected tests.
Right, where they test themselves and then check their answers.
Yeah, and the study, copy, cover, compare method.
Mm-hmm.
And practice testing can be especially helpful for those irregular words that don't follow the rules.
Right. Those are always the hardest ones.
And another cool thing about practice tests is that they can actually help reduce test anxiety. Yeah, because students are getting used to the format of the test, and they're less likely to feel stressed out when it comes time for the real thing.
That's good to know.
Now, some researchers have pointed out that if practice tests are only focused on memorizing specific words, they might not help students learn the underlying spelling rules.
Uh-huh.
But there are ways to design practice tests that encourage the application of those.